Have you ever encountered a person who altered the way you look at life? Not through grand actions, but through the smallest, quietest gesture. A smile across a diner counter. A child's laughter that is like sunlight in a dark room. A moment so plain, yet so potent, that it stops you in your tracks and makes you wonder what matters most in the end. This is not a story about money, though it will surprise you. It's not about fairy tale perfection, or love at first sight, or the glamorous picture people post online. No, this is a story about truth, about what happens when someone dares to show up in a world full of masks, completely real. No games, no pretense, just heart. Let me return you to a typical night at a small town diner, the type of establishment where the coffee is bitter, the tables have a bit of wear, and the clinking of plates couples with warm laughter from families who know the pleasure of the simple thing. That night, a woman named Evelyn came in, hoping for what most of us would hope for from a blind date, a good conversation, perhaps a flame, perhaps nothing. She had walls up, her heart stashed away behind years of frustration. She knew what she wanted, but life had plans of its own. Because waiting in that booth wasn't just a man waiting for her. It was a father, two little girls, who had his whole world in their little hands. And in that instant, all she believed she knew about love, about trust, about second chances, began to change. What would I do if the man I came to meet wasn't alone, but had brought with him the two people that were most important to him? Would I remain? Would I turn around? Would I view it as baggage, or as a portal into the type of heart that prefers honesty to perfection? Tonight's tale is of those decisions, the subtle ones that appear insignificant, but lead to remaking all we thought we understood about life and love. It's about hope, humility, and the type of strength it takes to tell oneself, here I am precisely as I am, take it or leave it. And as you listen, perhaps you might ask yourself, how many times have we made judgments too soon? How many times do we judge by the wrong measure? The car a person drives, what they wear, how much money they have in their bank account. And how many times do we also forget that the greatest riches are seen in love, in kindness, in the people who come through authentic, when they could so easily go behind a shiny veneer? This is a tale for everyone who's ever asked themselves whether honesty still counts. For everyone who's sick of the game, the masks, the way the world teaches us to pursue the glitter rather than the gold that endures. Because every now and then, the one who's worth holding on to isn't the one who blinds you at first sight, but the one who slowly reveals their soul, even when it is dangerous. So grab a seat with me for a few minutes. I'll tell you about a night that started out like any other. A woman coming into a diner, a man in a booth, two little girls and a coloring book, and some crayon. It could be ordinary, almost too simple to be important. But then what? It altered everything. Not only for them, but perhaps, in some measure, for anyone who will hear and keep in mind that love, when we find it, is never about what we have, but about who we are when nobody else is around to serve. The moment Evelyn opened the glass door of this small, snug family diner, there was a warm scent of freshly brewed coffee and freshly baked pies wafting inside. But something else, something she hadn't anticipated, caused her heart to miss a beat. She stopped at the doorway, surveying the compact room, full of the sound of family and the gentle clinking of knives, and had the thought, this is not what I imagined at all. She had been assured that this was a blind date, an innocent dinner, perhaps an opportunity to meet someone pleasant, someone who would make her smile over a shared dessert or a rich cup of coffee. That's the image that had run through her mind. Two adults speaking softly, corner booth, learning about one another. No diversion, no surprise. But what she now saw halted her in her tracks. There he was, James Walker, tall, broad-shouldered, calm confidence surrounding him, sitting in a booth by the window where the evening light poured in like honey. But he wasn't sitting there by himself. No, not even close. Two small girls sat across from him, no more than 6, the same in every aspect, identical pink dresses, curly hair, with small ribbons holding them back, and faces so sweet that it almost felt like it couldn't be real. They were both laughing, heads ducked over a children's menu, crayons lying all over the place, like a rainbow that had spilled across the table. Evelyn blinked, her mind reeling. Is this a joke? Who takes children on a first date? Her stomach was knotted by a rush of uncertainty. She had worn her best dress, spent more time on her hair than she ever had before, even sprayed a little perfume for the first time in months. And for what? Sent her into the... She almost turned on her heel and left. Almost. But then James looked up. His eyes, warm, steady, almost apologetic, locked onto hers, and he smiled, and she froze, just for a moment, before she could bolt. He straightened up, smoothing down his shirt, and said her name. Wow. Like it meant something.
Evelyn.
His voice was deep, calm, and for some odd reason, it mellowed her anger a little. She nodded, producing a small smile that fell short of reaching her eyes. And then he added, almost gently, I'm James. These two, well, they're my world. At that the little girls turned, and with the kind of innocent joy only children carry, they waved their tiny hands and said in perfect unison,
Oh.
Their giggles filled the space between them, and something inside Evelyn shifted, though she didn't want it to. She gritted a forced smile, but her head was reeling like a wheel on ice. What is wrong with this man, who comes to a blind date with children in tow? Her brain flashed warning signals. This was trouble. This was complicated. This was not what she signed up for. She made her way slowly to the booth, her heels clicking against the tile floor, and slid into the seat opposite him, still deciding whether to laugh, cry, or simply politely make an excuse and leave. James, however, did not appear unduly surprised by her indecision. He smiled merely once more, that steady, earthy smile, and waved a hand at the menus, as if this was the most natural situation in the world. And all the while, those two little girls continued to color, exchanging secrets in hushed tones, and casting curious glances at Evelyn, as if she were some sort of magical figure joining the bedtime tale. They sat, the silence between them, floating about like an unwanted guest. And before Evelyn even had a chance to process anything, James leaned over, placing his firm, work-hardened hands on the rim of the table. His voice was low and gentle, with the weight of sincerity that took her by surprise at once. I know this isn't what you wanted. He started softly, his eyes steady, but kind, as if he had rehearsed this speech 100 times in his head already this evening. But I'm a full-time dad. No nanny tonight. No excuses. It's me and them. The way he stated it, with no apology in his voice, almost as if a low declaration of who he was and what he believed in, caused something to move inside her. Not quite respect, but not judgment. Something between. Evelyn gave a polite nod, actually did a small smile that felt more like a facade than the real one. But inside, her mind was racing so quickly inside that she could hardly keep track of it. What is a blind date that ends up being family night? She lamented, a pang of disappointment building as she attempted to swallow it. This wasn't what she'd enrolled in. She'd promised herself she was prepared to open her heart once more, prepared to laugh at someone new, perhaps even dream a little. But this was a man with two small children who obviously needed all of him, each piece. And wasn't that a life she wasn't so sure she could fit in? And yet, as she looked down at the twins, her heart softened against her will. They were cute, just precious in a way that almost made her want to reach out and sweep one of those perfect curls her face. They sat, swinging legs under the booth, laughing and coloring, as if the world was only pink crayons and fairy tale castles. The one with the small dimple on the left side of her cheek, turned up, eyes shining like sunlight on the water, and smiled at Evelyn. Daddy says we're meeting a nice lady, she announced proudly, her tiny voice filled with a kind of hope that made Evelyn's heart squeeze unexpected. For the first time that night, a real laugh, soft, unplanned, slipped past Evelyn's lips. There was something so pure in their joy, something so untouched by all the messiness of adult expectation, that she couldn't help herself. Is that so? She said softly, and the little girl enthusiastically nodded, before returning to her work of stick figure princesses and purple flowers. The waitress had just arrived at that instant, disrupting the moment with the clinking cheer of menus. Evelyn watched as James talked to the woman, and once again, she saw something that didn't add up. He didn't even look at the expensive ones. He asked for the most straightforward things, the cheapest things, actually. A grilled cheese sandwich for both of the girls, a garden salad for himself, and water. Nothing extra, no dessert, no wine. And then he looked at her with those serene brown eyes and said, "Order whatever you want." Evelyn blinked in surprise at the breezy tone and nervously perused the menu, suddenly noticing every price listed on every page. She ordered something humble, though she wasn't quite sure why, perhaps out of manners, perhaps because something in the way he'd spoken put her in mind that spending lavishly would have been inappropriate. But then it struck her, as she looked at him in the dim light of the diner's overhead lamp. His attire was simple, worn in a manner that revealed long days and no time for mall runs. His watch was outdated, not antique in a trendy sense, but aged like it had once better, and just refused to let go. There was no glimmer of designer labels, no shiny sheen of wealth or privilege. He moved with the air of a man who had learned to exist on less, who'd resigned himself to the fact that life was all about priorities, and money, evidently, wasn't one of them. Evelyn felt her wonder sharpen into something almost painful. Weren't he and supposed to be successful? She'd picked up on things, small whispers from the friend who'd arranged this, offhand comments that James was doing great in life. But observing him now, sitting there in this booth, chuckling softly, as one of his girls whispered something humorous in his ear, he didn't appear to be a man floating in riches. If anything, he appeared to be a man struggling to keep his head above water, a man getting by. And that realization came down hard in her mind, leading her to a place she hadn't planned on visiting this evening. If this was the truth, if this was all there was, could she envision herself here, in this scene, with him, with them? The question hung in her heart like a shadow, even as the twins' laughter filled the air like the most exquisite sort of music, obscuring the lines of her uncertainty in a manner she didn't know whether to trust or be afraid of. Dinner continued, and something peculiar started to occur, slowly, almost stealthily, like the manner a winter freeze dissolves when the first whispers of spring appear. Evelyn, tense and guarded in her entrance, started to unwind bit by bit as the minutes ticked by. It wasn't due to the fact that the circumstances had miraculously made sense. Oh no, there were still a dozen or so questions spinning around her head, but due to James himself. He was different. Not like most men attempted to woo a woman on a blind date. He didn't interrupt her. He didn't fire compliments like darts, hoping one would stick. And most astonishingly, he didn't spend the night discussing himself. No, he inquired after her life, her job at the library, how it was to be surrounded by books all day long, like old friends standing row by row on wooden shelves. He inquired about her favorite tales, the ones that had seen her through difficult times, and listened, mind, when she spoke of her passion for vintage jazz records, how Billie Holiday's song could make her shut her eyes and sense the burden of 1,000 unspoken feelings. He even came in closer when she talked about her dream, something so delicate she hardly ever whispered it aloud, that one day she dreamed of owning a small bookstore of her own, a refuge of quiet in the world, full of stories and songs, where people could come and be safe, as she had always been in the pages of her books, and the manner in which he gazed at her when she spoke of that. Not the half-hearted nodding she'd become accustomed to from men who half-heard as they waited for their own turn to speak. No, James gazed at her as though what she was saying counted, as though she counted, and that was enough to make something within her unfurl in a fashion she hadn't experienced. At the same time, the girls had eaten their grilled cheese sandwich. Tiny crumbs spilled over the table like little stars, and now they were utterly engrossed in their drawing. Their crayons flew rapidly back and forth across the paper, tongues protruding from the sides of their mouths as they focused. Then, all of a sudden, one of them, the girl with the dimple and the most unruly curls, proudly held up her picture. "This is you," she declared, her voice ringing like a bell, and Evelyn couldn't help but giggle when she saw the photograph. A stick figure with a giant round head, a triangle skirt, and sunray hair, grinning the widest possible smile a crayon could render. "Wow," Evelyn exclaimed, her laughter rich and sincere. "You made me look beautiful." The little girl chuckled with clear satisfaction and immediately returned to coloring, humming softly work. And in an instant, the last of Evelyn's tension melted away. She didn't even notice at first, but her shoulders weren't tense, and her heart, Oh, her heart was a little less heavy. For the first time in a very long time, perhaps longer than she was willing to admit, she felt observed. Not for how she appeared, not for what she could present to someone, but for herself. But even in that warm, golden, there was one question smoldered within. It had been there from the instant she stepped inside, growing louder and louder by the minute, and now it would not be silent. Why had he brought the girls out? Why arrive at a blind date with hand and a life so packed? Why select a small diner and eat the lowest cost, least complicated when everything about him, from the way he sat to the way he took up space, suggested a man who'd lived larger than this a past? And the hardest question of all, was he faking that he was struggling? And if so, why? She took a sip of her water, allowing the silence to languish for a beat, then finally asked, her voice firm but questioning, James, may I ask something?
Why all this?
Why tonight, like this? For the first time that evening, he reclined, as if sinking into a reality he'd been holding for so long. His hands folded loosely at the table, his gaze steady, calm, but there was something in his eyes, a depth she hadn't seen before. Because, he said quietly, almost like he was confessing a secret, I'm tired of game. The words hung there for a moment, heavy in their simplicity. Most people, he went on, his voice low but certain, when they find out about the money, they change. They're thinking about dollars, not a man, not a father, and I cannot live that way anymore. I needed someone real, someone who would look at me like that. He waved a light hand across the table, over the chalk-worn crayon, the half-empty, the small sneakers hanging over the rim of the booth, and still wanted. Evelyn blinked, her mind struggling to keep up, the fringes of his words sparking a dozen different questions.
The money?
What money? She questioned herself, her heart racing. Had she misinterpreted every? Her eyes scanned him once, the bland shirt, the ancient watch, the humble meal. There was no indication of wealth, no hint of and yet something in the stillness of his words convinced her that this wasn't a man telling fairy story. No, James Walker's lying, or at least, a part of it.
Whoa.
What did it signify? As they exited the diner and into the fresh night air, the quiet hum of streetlights overhead and the distant sound of tires on wet road filled the hush. Evelyn tightened her coat around herself a bit more, the cool evening air rustling against her skin as her heels clicked soundless on the sidewalk. James stayed alongside, his fingers thrust carelessly in his pocket, the twins racing ahead with children's carefree laugh at dark. Evelyn's thoughts were still repeating the words he spoke, tired of game, wanting someone real, and she was proud of the courage of his words, were over by the weight of the implication. The parking lot lay in front, a broad swathe of asphalt interrupted only by lines of automobiles parked reflecting faint orange light the lamps. She looked around to come to a stop beside a faded older, perhaps a no-frills little SUV or even a family minivan with toys thrown about the seats and fingerprints smudged on the window. The type of vehicle that made sense for a single father balancing life on some. But then something occurred that left her breath stuck in her throat. Out of the darkness by the entrance, a valet emerged, starched in his uniform, clutching a set of keys in one hand, and behind him, it moved forward like a dream, cutting through the real world, a gleaming black Bentley, mirror bright, gliding steadily under the sights as if it didn't belong in the same terrain as the other automobile. The chrome trim winked in the luminescence, the leather interior glowing warmly from within, and Evelyn's heart sprang. She froze in place, eyes fixed on the car as it shrieked with unbridled delight, rushing towards it as if this was the most normal thing in.
Daddy, Daddy, it's here.
One of them shouted, and Evelyn stood there paralyzed, her mind grappling with putting what she was witnessing together with what she thought she knew only second before. She was able to speak, barely above a whisper. James, this vehicle. The words spilled out of her lips, dry with incredulity, as she switched to stare between the vehicle and the man standing next to her, serene as a midnight sky. James didn't hurry to lane, didn't swell out his chest or grin. Instead, he smiled, a tiny, almost shy smile that reached his eyes in the gentlest way. I said it, he replied soft, his voice holding that same unshakable composure that had run throughout the whole evening. I get along. He hesitated for a moment, studying her, as if gauging her response, then continued, his tone firm but gentle, but I wanted to see if you'd sit with me in that diner, before you ever knew what this was. The words landed like a gentle storm, their impact dropping deep, erasing all assumptions she'd made this night. Evelyn stood there, shocked, the universe condensing to this one moment, to this man who had sat with her across from a plain booth consuming a small meal, chuckling with his daughters, and inquiring about her aspirations rather than flaunting his status like some trophy. This man, this quiet, gentle father figure, was a millionaire, not just managing, not just scraping by, a guy who might have picked up the best steakhouse in town, a rooftop lounge with twinkling lights, a bottle of wine that was more expensive than her week's worth of groceries. And what did he do? He picked a small diner, a sticky table with syrup circles, and grilled cheese for the girls. Why? Because he had to view her without the filter of money, without expectation, without greed that usually pursued men like him. And in realizing this, something did happen to her heart, something she hadn't experienced in so long it scared her half to death. James regarded her, then truly regarded her, his eyes warm and questioning, as if formulating some question he didn't have the courage to verbalize. His voice, when it came, was soft, steady, almost fragile in its vulnerability. "So," he said, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at the corner. His mouth, "Still think I'm just a broke dad?" Evelyn gazed at him for a beat, her thoughts replaying the whole night like fragments of a puzzle fitting together. The humble order, the antique watch, the simple attire, the manner in which he talked of seeking something authentic. And then, as if the pressure of the moment shattered, she laughed, a laugh that burst forth from her like sunshine bursting through the clouds, warm and rich and unfettered. She shook her head slowly, her eyes gleaming with something that no longer resembled surprise but something richer. "Honestly," she asked, her voice calm, her heart no longer thumping but sinking into a peace she hadn't felt in years, "that's the man I admired, the one in the diner, not this car." She said it quietly, but with a strength that stayed in the air, and she saw it then, the way his shoulders relaxed, the silent exhalation he let out, the flash of relief in his eyes like a candle flame stabilizing after a blast of wind. James smiled then, and it was a real one, the kind that begins in the chest and makes its way up until it illuminates the entire face. And for the first time that evening, she understood that this wasn't about money. It never was. It was about trust. Undefined about truth, undefined about discovering something genuine in a world that too often conceals itself behind the glaze of things that don't endure. As James guided the car out of the parking lot and onto the empty lamplit street, the engine roar mixed with the gentle chorus of small voices in the back seat. The twins warbled their favorite song off-key, snickering between verses, and their laughter poured into the night like sunlight filtering through clouds, bathing the car in a radiance beyond any luxury option. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat, her hands lightly resting on her lap. She would have turned her gaze out towards the window for dancing lights reflected off the glass of those passing. She should have been overwhelmed, possibly even intimidated by the revelation of who James was, a man of good fortune, a man who could have chosen for a life far gaudier than this one quiet evening. Yet somehow, instead of that, she felt calm. No, and not even calm. She felt full, her heart overflowing with something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Hope, the sort of hope that speaks softly, not with promises of fireworks or grand gestures, but something solid, something actual. She snatched a glance at James, the ease of his hands on the wheel, the way his profile relaxed when he listened to his daughters sing, and something within her hurt in the most tender manner. This was a man who could have retreated behind the fortress of his wealth, who could have showered her with diamonds and candlelit dinners over city skylines, but he did not. He sat at a diner with sticky tablet tops, a plate of grilled cheese sandwiches, and the two little girls who possessed his entire heart. And in doing so, Evelyn had seen the reality of him, a reality that no fortune could purchase. That evening, as the city lights gave way to the darkness of her neighborhood, Evelyn knew something she would remember for the rest of her life. Money can buy doors, sure. It can purchase homes, cars, and things that shine in the dark. But generosity, humility, a heart expansive enough to hold love for family, most of all,
That's what opens hearts. That's what endures when the glitz wears off. And James, oh James wasn't after a guy who swooned over his bank balance or melted at the mere sight of his vehicle. He wasn't after admiration packaged in currency. He was after something much rarer, much more valuable. Someone who loved the man behind it all. The father who packed lunches, read bedtime stories, and made room for his daughters in every nook and cranny of his life. A person who would look past the glitz and glamour when the lights went down and the applause stopped. Evelyn considered that, as he drove up to her street, the vehicle coasting to a slowing halt beneath the gentle light of a street lamp. For an instant, both of them remained immobile, the twins' laughter still echoing softly from the back seat, background music to the subtle transition between two strangers who had begun the evening, and now stood at the doorway of something which was somehow holy. James looked at her then, his grin tiny but genuine, and in his eyes, she glimpsed thankfulness, not for the night, not for the man, but for the fact that she hadn't left, that she had opened a door most would have slammed shut the instant they spotted two booster seats in the back of the car. Evelyn smiled in return, and that smile contained a reply she did not have to say out loud. Weeks after that, she would be standing again, in that very same tiny diner, the bell on the door ringing as she entered, her heart more buoyant than it had been in years. The same booth lingered, the same twin girls in coloring books and crayons, and James, always James, with that steady warmth in his eyes that seemed like home. Only this time she wasn't questioning the kids being brought by him. She wasn't questioning the small order, the old watch, or the quiet strength in his voice. She knew now. She realized that love, actual love, doesn't conceal the things that are of most importance. It doesn't make a spectacle or dress itself up in glittery distractions. It appears as grilled cheese sandwiches and giggles over crayons, as two little voices singing in the backseat going home. It appears as truth, and in a world so full of masks, that truth felt like the most precious treasure of all. And so if you ever feel uncertain about what is important, remember this. Sometimes the most epic love stories do not begin with diamonds, or candlelight, or diamonds, or candlelight. Sometimes they begin in a booth, at a corner diner, with two small girls and a man who just wanted to be seen. Because seeing is an act of acknowledgement, and he just wanted to be acknowledged as a dad. Life has a way of reminding us every now and then what is really important. It's not difficult to be blinded by the surface, the glitz, the prestige, the things that the world believes are valuable. But in the moment of stillness, when the laughter of a small diner booth fills the air, or when a child's artwork makes you grin from ear to ear, we realize the truth. Love is never about what we have, but about who we are. We realize the truth. Love is never about what we have, but about who we are. When we're alone with ourselves, we all come to those times when we question whether we're enough, just us. And perhaps the answer has always been straightforward. The right people will never require the mask, the act, or the money. They'll look for the heart, the honesty, the bravery it takes to be real. So this evening, take a breath and ask yourself, what's most important to you? Because ultimately, it's those silent decisions based on love that reveal the true tale of who we are.